Hello to everybody taking Advanced Student Development Theory. We're here for another week of class. What we are talking about this week is the spiritual development of college students. And I put this into 2 weeks because there is so much material that is out talking about the spiritual development of college students, particularly in the last maybe 10 to 15 years. And there was just so much of it that I thought we should spend a couple weeks going through it, just as we're spending more than 1 week on cognitive development, that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about spiritual identity development in the next couple of weeks, and going to base that on some of the articles that I've given you, and I have a YouTube video that I'm having you look at this week, and that sort of thing. So I hope we can have a lively and engaged discussion. And I'm sure there are multiple worldviews represented in the class, and I think that adds some diversity of perspective to our discussion, and so I think that's a real strength of our group. So I'm looking forward to talking about the material and related issues as we go through the week online, and I do want to say several things as we start off this discussion. About the studies that you are reading for the week and the issues that they bring up. The first thing is I'm having you watch a short YouTube video that is done interviewing Alexander Aston. He's also called Sandy Aston. Helen Aston is obviously his wife, and then one of their colleagues, Jennifer Lindholm. The three of them came out with a book about college student spirituality that was based on over 100,000 interviews with students, or 100,000 surveys rather, with students. And so the Astons, of course, run the Higher Education Research Institute and the CIRP survey, the Cooperative Institutional Research Program, and they have given us a tremendous amount of data over the decades about college students and their attitudes and opinions and values. And they recently, in the grand scheme of things recently, just started to survey students about their spiritual beliefs. Now, I didn't have you read the whole book, or any part of the book really, for this week, but I did want you to be aware of the study. So that's why I'm having you take a look at how they talk about their study, and their study was massive enough that they spent a book just talking about that one study, because it has many implications for us understanding college students today and their spiritual beliefs and values and those sorts of things. A couple of things I would throw out to you just for consideration. Helen Aston talks a little bit about how higher education has really ignored or been standoffish when it comes to spiritual matters over the years, and now there's this sudden movement to ask some of those big questions. You might ponder a bit as to why that might be so. Why was higher education and those who work in it hesitant to speak about matters of spirituality, and why are they more open to doing that today? You might also think about what's the relationship between spiritual development and other areas of student development, whether that's Chickering's sixth vector or cognitive development or other things, moral development. How do those all intersect? And just in your own thinking, I just encourage you to ponder those areas. For this week, I had you read 4 articles, and 3 are actually authored by the same individual. Now, when I say that, you probably are looking at the articles and you're thinking, no, it only looks like there's a duplicate once. Alyssa Bryant is the author with that name of 2 of your articles, and then after she married her partner, she then she took her partner's last name, and her partner was Rockenbach, and so Alyssa now goes by Alyssa Rockenbach, and so 3 out of 4 of the articles are from her, and the other this week is from a research team that I worked with years ago, where we were studying college student spirituality, and particularly the concept of a spiritual struggle. So I'm going to say a little bit about each article that I hope will help you to digest what is there and ponder some questions. The Bryant article, Bryant 2006, I'd encourage you to take a look at how she talks about 2 clusters of religious preferences. One, she said, was more Christian in nature, and that this cluster, students were high in spirituality, religious commitment, engagement, social conservatism, those sorts of things. And then there was this other cluster where she found most of the students in her study who could be called religious minorities, and she noted that in that group they could be characterized as being less religious, more skeptical, and had what she called greater pluralistic openness. One of the things I think it's important for us to tackle and deal with in all of this research on college student spirituality is, what does it mean? How does pluralism as a concept intersect with spirituality? Pluralism essentially being a concept where many who support pluralism tend to look at spiritual beliefs as that there's no one that is better than the other, that we all have our own spiritual beliefs, and that there's really no standard to figure out whose is better, whose is right, that sort of thing, that we should treat them all the same intellectually and otherwise. There are others who have beliefs that are outside pluralism, who may look to a religious text and say, well, no, my religious text doesn't really support the idea of pluralism. It supports an idea of a singular deity, and or that this particular religion or belief system is actually better than others. And so it's interesting, I think, as we talk about these issues, to figure out the degree to which pluralism can intersect with spirituality, areas where it might have agreement, areas where it might not. And so that's food for thought. With the Bryant and Aston study, they certainly found that women struggle spiritually more than men. You might ask yourself, why is that? And interestingly enough, they also found that students at religious colleges tend to struggle more spiritually than students at other colleges. And you might ponder, well, why on earth might that be the case? So just something to think about. I want to say a little more about the study that I was involved in, to give you the benefit of talking to one of the authors of one of the things you're reading this week. There was a group of master's and doctoral students, all of whom are co-authors on this study with my name there at the end. And they were very interested in matters of spirituality, and they were also all higher education and student affairs students. And so they wanted to explore that interest through a research study that we were doing at our institution where I worked at the time. And so one thing that's important to note is that I believe there are about 9 of us, we all had very different religious and spiritual beliefs, and so we came to the table with different sets of assumptions and values when it comes to spirituality. But the one thing that we were all really interested in is what led college students to struggle with their spiritual beliefs during college. And we chose a qualitative interview-based approach to study that particular issue. We realized very early on that we needed to define our terms very carefully, because if you look at a lot of the literature, they often will use religion and spirituality and faith interchangeably, or those dividing lines aren't as clear. And I'm not so sure they're still as clear as they might be conceptually. But we did try to define those in the study, such as they were related to what we found. And we interviewed 16 college students, and we interviewed them each twice. There was some member checking that occurred on the second interview, and the results were transcribed verbatim so that we could go through the transcripts together. And on a weekly basis, we got together to talk about what meaning we were seeing in the results and what themes seemed to be prominent. And so the themes that we found to be particularly prominent first was the influence of academics, and how that gave a chance, an opportunity really to reflect. And so they might have taken a certain course, or they might be reading a book that was assigned for class that really had them rethink their spiritual beliefs. There was also sort of a cluster of meaningful comments about external sources of challenge and support. That could be people, organizations, the campus environment itself, but all of those things were part of the college experience that either helped or hindered the spiritual development of our participants. Then we also found that there was some internal process of struggle, that when they were struggling, that much of that was done inside, that they were really trying to figure out, who am I as a spiritual being, and what do I believe, what do I not believe. It was a very emotional time for them that they talked about when they went through those struggles. They often turned to books for answers rather than to other people, that they really did go it alone during the deepest times of their struggle. And then there was another cluster where what we found was that students re-examined and re-evaluated their spiritual values, that they kind of compared how they were taught before they got to college and how they feel now, and compared the two, and really reconsidered their spiritual beliefs. And so it's an interesting study. It is qualitative, and so we can't really generalize it, but it can give us a few ideas for what college students may be going through and how they experience those on a deep personal level. The last study I'd talk about is Rochenbach's study, and I would encourage you to think about a couple things. One is that she encountered, or rather, the concept of encountering contrast was meaningful for her participants. So they noted that when it came to their spirituality, what was a growth-producing event was encountering contrast. So different views, perspectives, people, that sort of thing. And I would encourage you to think about the methodology, that it was purposeful sampling, so they sought out people individually based on their characteristics, and they wanted maximum variation sampling. So they wanted as many different and differing viewpoints represented as possible. And so with that, I think it's important for us to not necessarily look at the study as something that would characterize mainstream students, but that characterize many different populations. So I do hope that you enjoy the readings this week, and I have posed some specific questions for us to respond to on the website, and I hope you get a lot out of those, and as always, the interaction I think that we have in discussing these questions can lead to some even deeper learning. So thank you very much, and have a great week.